Everyone to our Friday night reading series of the MFA in Writing and Publishing program. My name is Rita Banerjee. I'm the director of the program. Our MFA in Writing and Publishing program is quite unique at BCFA because we're the only residential program here on campus, though we are now kind of doing most of our classes and readings and programming online because of the pandemic. But it's been kind of beneficial that way. We've gotten people from all over the world and all over the country to come into these readings, and it's great to see family and friends, those people who can normally come to Vermont, come to our public readings. So I thank everyone who's joined us this evening, and it's good to see a lot of your faces, especially the alums and former employees here at BCFA. We miss you guys. So welcome to our Friday night reading series. We typically feature our faculty and visiting writers, editors, and agents during this reading series. And now we hope to also feature some of our alums who have new books coming out. So I'll be telling you some more information about that in just a moment. Our MFA in Writing and Publishing program is also very unique because it is a multi-genre program here at BCFA that really focuses on kind of industry-facing pedagogy. So we love to prepare our students to thrive in the publishing world, post-MFA, and make those writerly connections and, develop craft techniques in more than one genre. So thank you, everyone who has joined us this evening. One thing I wanted to note is this reading will be recorded and is being recorded. So if you don't want your video to be part of the recording, we just ask that you mute it, especially during the Q&A portion when people are asking questions at the end of this evening. And then just as protocol, please do mute your microphone when our readers are reading, so we can hear everyone clearly. This recording will be part of YouTube, part of the VCFA YouTube channel, and there's a subsection for the MFA in Writing and Publishing program. So if you miss any portion of this reading, please check out the video on YouTube, which will be available in about 2 weeks. So just some information about, the recording and so on. And the other thing I would like to say is I will be introducing our first graduate student who will introduce our first reader of the evening. And then Shinyi Pae, who is our new assistant director, will be moderating the Q&A portion of this reading and will be introducing our graduate students going forward. So she'll be kind of moderating the second half of the program. If you have any questions for her, please do feel free to say hello. She's joining us tonight from the Writing and Publishing account and is helping us, bring in some people through the waiting room as well. So typically when we have these Friday night readings, we have a graduate student who introduces each of our faculty members and visiting writers and so on. And it's a very kind of personal introduction. And the graduate students who will be introducing our faculty tonight are Zoe Adams, who will be introducing James Scott, who will read first. Sarah Stancliffe will be introducing Justin Bigos, who will read second. And Micah Della Cueva will be introducing Kelly McMahon, who will be reading third. So we're so excited to have all of those grad students here and all of our faculty. I will be introducing Zoe, who will go on to introduce James, as is the order of ceremonies. And then Shinyu will jump in to introduce Sarah and so on. One thing I wanted to say, after the readings are over, each of our faculty will be reading for about 15 to 20 minutes or so. And there'll be student introductions that'll last from like maybe 2 or 3 minutes each. After the reading portion of the evening wraps, we'll take a small break, and then we're going to do a discussion and Q&A. So if you would like to ask the featured writers, any question, feel free to, raise your hand or put yourself off of mute during that time. And if you want to put in your question in the chat portion, you can as well. So first order of business is I would like to introduce Zoe Adams, a wonderful graduate student in our program, a first year. And Zoe will be introducing James Scott, our first reader of the evening.
Yes, hi everybody, thanks for coming. So James Scott is a professor of VCFA who I have for the structure class in Module 2. And he's the author of the national best-selling novel, The Kept, which was a finalist for the New England Book Award and an Amazon Best Debut of the Year. The New York Times had some fine words to say about him. Scott is a master of mood. This landscape is more mythic than historic, and Scott's characters are dark brush strokes of appetite and deceit. His short fiction can be found in various anthologies and journals such as One Story, Plowshares, and American Short Fiction, and earned several Pushcart nominations. A frequent fellow at Yaddo, James has also received awards and residencies from the Sewanee Writers Conference, the Tin House Summer Writers Workshop, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, the Millay Colony, and the St. Botolph's Foundation. He was an issue editor of One Story and fiction editor and later managing editor of Redivider. Currently, he lives in Rhode Island, where he created and hosts the podcast TK with James Scott. TK with James Scott, that's the title, where he interviews writers, editors, publishers, booksellers, designers, and agents. He is at work on his second novel, tentatively titled A Full Restoration, and he has a very cute child. Well, two very cute children.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me? I'm losing my voice a little bit. Okay. It's really good to see everybody. I wish we were in the cozy confines of Cafe Anna, sweating up the windows and smelling the coffee and the soup of the day, and maybe some wine. Someone spilled. Yeah, I spilled beer. It might have happened. I don't know. I can neither confirm or deny that something that happened to me. I miss the podium. I'm so uncomfortable here. I'm like on a desk, which should seem fine, but I miss that podium. I should have gone out.
I don't want to interrupt you too much, but there's a slight echo when you're speaking, so it might be your headphones. If you want to maybe replug them in or unmute yourself and then try it again.
Sure. Let me see. Is that her? Is it still echoey? It's still echoey? It's better-ish.
It's still echoing, yeah.
I have a different pair. Should I try a different pair?
Yes, please.
Let me try that.
I'll get it. There.
There you go.
Yes?
Yeah.
Okay. Better?
So much better.
Okay. I'm just worried that I'm worried that they're gonna run out of from class. I forgot to charge them after class this morning, so I'm worried they might die. So.
Okay. This is a lot better. Thank you.
Yeah. So where was I? Well, I was talking about our beloved podium, which obviously we don't want to miss the end of that anecdote. There is no end to that anecdote. I'm uncomfortable sitting here, but you know, when a pandemic hits, the first thing everyone does is they go out and buy a sweet podium. So they're all back ordered. I want to do some quick thank yous. I wouldn't be here or there or on your screens anywhere, certainly without Micaiah and Tom, and especially Rita and Lizzie, who showed me the way, and Aaron and Shanyu and Stephanie and Karen. And I thank you all so much for making this such a wonderful place to be, even if I'm not being there right now in body. And but most of all, I'd like to thank all the students who I think in this foggy time are fighting their way through it and thinking about writing and reading and carving a path there. And I know they're all working so hard and trying so hard to do what they're doing even under these circumstances. And I'm really thrilled to see what they're going to produce out of this time, and excited to get to share these classes with them. So, and I'm thrilled to read with Justin and Kelly as well. So this is from the novel that I've been working on for a while. I think Zoe said the title was The Last Restoration. The title currently is Restoration. I could use up all my time just talking about all the different titles the book has had. I could just spend 15 minutes with all my prospective titles. I've been working on it for about 6 years. But essentially, our main character, Hillary Warner, has two occupations. He is a diver who occasionally helps out the state police when someone goes missing, and he owns an architectural salvage shop. This is all in a small town in Vermont. This scene, pardon me, is a bit into the book. It's chapter 4, but there's a prologue too. And what you need to know is a man has gone missing and is presumed drowned. His name is Sandy Yorkshire, and his wife, May, meets Hillary, our main character, while he's diving for her husband. And obviously he does not find her at that point. And then they meet again on a rock overlooking the town, which I think I read last year or the year before, that scene. And then the next day, partially unrelated, partially related, Hillary tries to kill himself. And this is the first scene that happens after that. This is the next morning. This is him going to work and sort of going through the motions. And I think the only thing you need to know is that he tried to drown himself in the pond behind the shop, and that his coworker is the person who found him. So, all right. After spreading the invoices across the surface of my desk, I hear a rumble of a truck pulling up to the dock, and the laughter and the voices of the men. Carlos clomps down the stairs from his office, the door slams, and he greets the guys and calls out orders. Their footfalls echo in the trailer. Someone opens the garage door to the workshop, and the forklift backs up, and old pallets screech across the floor as they're either kicked or shoved out of the way. I know all of these sounds. For some reason, when the second hand on my clock is on its way up, it makes a different noise than when it's on its way down, and I listen for that too, for the change, for the irregularity. Someone calls out hello from the depths of the store, and high heels click on the cement. I venture out of the office and startle Kelly Anderson, a decorator from Burlington who comes down a few times a month to outfit summer cottages on Lake Champlain and ski chalets in Stowe and at Okemo and Killington. She stands close to 6 feet with honey blonde hair and sports a flowing white blouse tucked into black pants that billow out from her waist. Her sunglasses sip onto the bridge of her nose from her forehead, and she pushes them back with a manicured fingernail. No Carlos, she says. I start to say he went out to the loading dock when she makes a big show of sighing and asks if I can check his desk for her file. Sure, I say, and jog up to his office, my old office, the former manager's office of Stringfield's Rug Company, which looks out over the floor. Everything is so immaculate I hesitate to move anything, but I check the various file boxes on his desk and slots on the wall by the door. Nothing says Anderson, and not wanting to return empty-handed, I grab a random clipboard from a nail and rush down to her, my feet clanging on the wrought iron. I'm sorry, I say, trying to pretend I'm not out of breath, swallowing air and speaking from the back of my throat, but I don't see your file. Shoot, Kelly says. She bites at a nail. And who are you? Oh, I say, trying to recover myself. We've met before, many times. This is my place. I'm the owner. I hiccup a loud breath. Hillary Warner. Right, she says, and knocks the side of her head with her palm. Wait, so what's that? She asks and points at the clipboard. Oh, I say, and look down. The first page contains names that are vaguely familiar, and behind that, a series of color photographs torn from magazines of naked women. I go red and my eyes blur and I take a violent step back from her. This is for something else I need to do. Well, no, it's not mine. One of the guys must have left it. She shrugs. It seems like the clipboard is actually throwing off heat. She waits a minute, and when it becomes obvious I'm not going to say anything, she plows ahead. So you must know where my countertop is, the one from the grocer's in New Hampshire or something. I'm sorry, Carlos usually has everything set aside for me, and I don't have a ton of time. She flips her gold watch around on her wrist, the band loose and sparkling, and checks the face. Brushed steel, I ask, knowing it to be the only large countertop we currently have. I don't, however, know what's on the truck. Thankfully, she nods, and I lead her around the corner, move a barn door aside, and there it is. I knock on the surface. It's a beauty. The reserve cracks, and she runs her hands along the steel. It's wonderful, she says. I smile. She says, I saw the police cars down at the river. They're still looking for Sandy, Yorkshire. Carlos and I drove by this morning, and there was nobody out there, I say, my smile not fading fast enough. Tragic, she says, and bends her lips in an exaggerated frown. I'm friends with his wife. We served on a couple of boards together, that type of deal. I think of the two of them, May not dressed in the damp sweatshirt or wrapped with a police blanket, but sitting at a boardroom table, deciding on a winter fundraiser. We outfitted a lot of their house, the Yorkshires, I say, and think of the oak dining table, the chestnut mantle, the mirror, the doors, the cabinets, and the desk built by my father that Carlos practically needed to keep under armed guard because so many people tried to buy it out from under them. Yeah, that was me, she says, confused. Well, then we'll have to think of a way to repay you for your kindness, I say, but it sounds weird as soon as it leaves my lips. She ignores it, clearly used to clunky jokes from men. You think there's any chance they find him, she says, maybe he washes up somewhere? I picture him feeling off his windbreaker and standing at the edge of the river. The sun weighs down on him. Of course, he dips his toes. Then maybe dangles a foot off the ledge to see how it feels on his calves, and that's his last mistake. So no chance, she says at my long pause. There's a chance, I say, and push the barn door completely out of the way with a loud squealing. She hangs her head at something in my voice, and I wish I can make up for it. You know, she says, May and I once won a dance competition. It was a charity thing, and we practiced for a month or so over at their apartment when they lived in the city. Sometimes Sandy would come for moral support, and once he started clapping his hands, and his rhythm was so fucking bad that May had to ask him to stop. She laughs and then touches a finger to her lip like she doesn't quite understand what came out of her mouth. Now, she says, where's Carlos? I can't remember the rest of my list. I leave her at that and find our two longest-termed employees after Carlos, Chad Meyer and Tommy Sullivan, in the workshop. Meyer sitting on the half-raised forklift, Sullivan in the cab, competing to throw loose bolts into the can for sawdust shavings in the corner of the room. The idea of mentioning they have a truck to unload crosses my mind, but instead I say, hey fellas, who's winning? I force a chuckle and they wait for me to do something meaningful. Are you looking for something to do? We're waiting on Kelly, Sullivan says. She's here, I say. That's what I came to ask you guys. What about the island in the sink, Meyer asks. I blush and glance at the clipboard to avoid their eyes. I'm not sure. Hey, that's my board, Meyer says and turns it over. On the back, his name in block letters has been written with magic marker, though he ran out of space at M-E-Y, and the E and R trailed down the side. He points at it with a stubby finger. There are a bunch of pictures here, I say, and hand it to him. Yeah, he asks. He lifts the top sheet and glances at the photos. Oh, yeah. He's not embarrassed. Instead, he turns to Sullivan. Hey, I found our softball rosters. Sullivan ignores him. So Kelly's waiting? I nod and he leaps down from the forklift and brushes himself off. I'll make sure she still wants the island and the sink when she sees them. I can do it, Meyer says, and they jockey for position, trying to win the race to the door like two boys in elementary school. I edge out of their way, embarrassed. I hear a thump from the trailer of the truck, and Carlos comes in through the open garage door, wiping dust from his palms. Kelly's here? He didn't even tell us, Meyer says to Carlos and hikes a thumb at me. Did you get her what she needed, boss? Carlos asks. Meyer snickers. Get her what she needed, he says. She asked me to have the guys pack up the countertop, I say. I can handle it, he says. She has a tendency to make this place go haywire. She never remembers my name, I say. Sullivan checks Meyer into the doorframe and they crash into the store. Carlos hurries after them, but taps me on the side with the edge of his folder. Thanks for taking care of her. We got it from here. I take a moment to follow. I want to be part of the group, and I practice a variety of jocular things to say when I turn the corner. Hurry your lazy asses up. Get the let out, boys. I settle for, hey, you assholes. And before I can quite finish, I emerge from the rows of doors to see Kelly, Carlos, Meyer, and Sullivan gathered around May Yorkshire. My words, hey, you ass, echo through the old warehouse, and all eyes turn to me. Sullivan rolls his eyes. May's are red-rimmed and puffy. Meyer actually slaps his forehead with his palm. Oh, hi, I say after a painful pause. Hello, May, Mrs. Yorkshire. You're here for Kelly? No, she says, confused. She wears the same sneakers, shorts, and beaten Princeton sweatshirt, the black dulled almost to gray, the orange letters chipping off, the hood and the body tearing away from each other, the neck drooping and the thread on the pouch visible and shredded in spots. I'm here to see you, actually. She leans in and Kelly's long arms envelop her in a hug. When they release, Kelly flicks her head and her hair whips back in an elegant wave onto her shoulders. Take care, she says, and call me if you need anything. She gives another exaggerated, sad face as one would to a child whose stuffed animal is sick. Are you busy? May says to me. I have some time. I fall into step with her and lead the way to my office. I can feel the men's eyes on us. Carlos and Kelly start their discussion up again, and before I can close the door behind us, laughter rings out. May flinches. I motion for her to sit in the chair on the other side of my desk, but she stays upright, cradling her purse. She tugs at the string of the hood on her sweatshirt and puts it in her mouth. Hey, sorry I said, hey, you ass. I wasn't talking to you, I say. She doesn't sit. She glances around the room, taking everything in. I'm so sorry, she says. Would it be okay if we went someplace else? It's a little claustrophobic in here. Right, and the dust, I say. I inspect the room myself as if I've noticed for the first time it has all the charm of a prison cell. I see it coming. My blood goes thick in my ears. We walk out to the front of the store thinking we can talk in the greenhouse, but inside, Carlos and Kelly laugh about something. Their images distorted by the warps in the glass. Surely they'll need to use his office when they're done, and I frantically try to think of alternatives when May says, is there someplace out back, someplace we can talk? We kick through the leaves around the far side of the store and come out from behind the wall of arbor vitae 50 feet from the pond. The boys have gone back to clanging around in the trailer of the truck. The sander whirs in the shop. A picnic table, once red but growing green with moss, stands at a slant under a hemlock that tilts in the other direction. The pink child's push-button fishing rod the guys sometimes use during lunch or smoke breaks lies on the tabletop, a chunk of hot dog still on the hook. I give a wide berth to the cinder block, like my letter might magically reappear. So when he tried to walk into the water, he was holding a cinder block, and it's back on the shore, and he put his suicide note under there. I'm not sure whether I should sit next to her or across from her, but when I settle on facing her, she straddles the bench looking at the water. After a moment, I do the same. It hasn't changed. Nothing about trying to drown myself has changed anything. Even the rock probably sank enough in the muck that it'd be hard to find. The only real evidence is the cut on my palm, and I press my thumb into it until my eyes sparkle with lightning bolts of pain. As I wait for her to say something, Carlos's laugh echoes its way to us. I'm sorry I was such a bitch to you before, she says. You weren't, I say. I would never think that you were that. What happened to your hand, she asks. I look at it as if I just found it on the ground. Oh, this? I cut it. You should change that bandage, she says. Some of the blood has turned it a rust color. She rubs at her eyes. I can't stop thinking about something. Can you tell me about the man, the fugue state man? So sorry. So in their earlier conversation, I think that I read last year, he tells her that this man in the town disappeared and then all of a sudden showed back up. But anyway. I tell her all the details I can remember. He'd been around 50, a relatively healthy dad with nothing strange in his medical or mental history. One day his wife woke up, assumed he'd left for work, and thought nothing of it. But when he didn't come home that night, she began to worry. May draws up her hood at this. The wife called her husband's office the next morning. He worked at some kind of paint store, and he hadn't been in it all. By the weekend, his face was plastered on every newscast and paper in Vermont. A full week after he disappeared, he reappeared, shopping in Marysville, buying a bag of apples. I just missed him, I said. I'd been there maybe an hour before. It was right around this time of year. The clerk, recognizing him, brought the police, not sure what to do, and when they called him by his name, he didn't answer right away. And I remember the guy talking about it on 60 Minutes, and he spoke haltingly and said that it sounded like someone shouting down a well at him. He finally found the light, was how he described it, I say. A few days later, he returned home to his family. A few days? I nod. They kept him in the hospital for observation, but nothing on his MRIs or CT scans turned up anything unusual. Their son came home from college, and his parents had come to stay with them, but not for long, as nothing seemed to have changed and no answers were forthcoming. I didn't tell May that on the same show, his wife's smile had tightened when they'd asked her about this time, and all she said was he was different. And it didn't go away all at once like someone flipping a switch, but it had faded over time, like a sunburn. That's it, she asks. I tell her that it's all I can remember. She pulls the string on her sweatshirt tight. They never figured out what the fuck happened? Not really, I say. But you know how these stories go. Once the excitement's over and things die down, no one wants to pick up the pieces. I regret it the second I say it. A little laugh, a surprised gasp of a chuckle emerges from her hood. Well, that's what I'm afraid of, she says. I'm sorry, I say. I almost tell her that I haven't talked to someone who listens to me in a long time. A breeze releases a deluge of needles and oval-shaped cones from the hemlock above. I meant the media and, the general public, the people involved. They don't let go of it that way. Did you? Her thin fingers shake when they peek out from her overlong sleeves, and she picks at her cuticles. With your wife? Not as much as I should have, I say, surprised at my own truthfulness. We watch a brace of ducks land on the pond, skittering on the water before settling in and paddling around. They push aside the leaves and make dark pathways in the water. It's as if they're paving roads, stretches of blacktop circling around and around each other. I just can't imagine living this way, she says. I can smell the pond water not just on the air, but seeping out of my pores. I press a finger into the center of the scratch again, but the electricity is fading. It gets easier, I say. You get used to it. Her cuticle has started to bleed and she sticks her finger in her mouth. That's what I'm afraid of, she says around it. She lets out a groan and rests her head on the table. The tip of her hood points at me. I'm lost, she says. That's the feeling. When you realize you missed a turn or your directions no longer match up and you've been driving for far too long and you have no idea how to go back or where to go back to, where you turned, where things went wrong. There isn't any backing up, I say. I know, she says from the depths of her sweatshirt. We sit in silence for a long time. Two of the ducks squabble, quacking and taking turns rushing at each other. Something bangs against the garage door in the loading dock. I guess I better go check on them, I say. Make sure everything is under control. The edge of the table leaves a bright red line on her forehead. I might sit here for a while, she says. I nod. Hey, let me know if you see my husband buying fruit. Apples are in season, I say. I'm going to choose. I'm going to elect to choose. I'm going to take that as a good sign. She forces a smile. Thanks. I'm going to end there.
Our next introducer tonight is Sarah Stancliffe, who is a second-year student whose work blends elements of poetry, creative nonfiction, literary collage, and memoir. Sarah will introduce our next speaker, Justin Bigos.
Hello. I feel so happy to be able to introduce Justin and to follow James because what good company we're all in tonight. Okay. Justin Bigos is a gentle giant. Just the other day, he acknowledged he has the natural frame of Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King of Halloween Town. So it feels fitting that we hear Justin read tonight in early October, right after a full harvest moon. In the spring 2020 semester, right in the midst of the first horrors of the pandemic, Justin taught a craft module on the elegy, a serious, heavy form lamenting the dead. He was practically giddy at the discussion and dissection of elegiac poetry, and at first I found his glee unsettling. But through 3 weeks overshadowed by uncertainty and isolation, Justin guided us students to see how poems for our dead may be transformed into wonder, and in turn transform our sorrow into something else. One of Justin's former students described him on ratemyprofessor.com as kind of like a big poetry alien who's just trying to figure out how to interact with humans. About teaching, Justin has said, "It's the best job I've ever had, and I love my students. I'm not just saying that to be rah, rah, rah. I know some writers consider themselves writers first and the teaching is second. That's cool, but for me, teaching is fuel for my writing." If you haven't heard him say it yet, be forewarned that pedagogy is one of Justin's most used words, but that repetition reveals just how seriously he assumes the mantle of teacher, donning his tweed suit jacket as the joyful, rightful king of the poetry patch. Justin's poetry collection, Mad River, was published in 2017 and his chapbook, 20,000 Pigeons, in 2014. His work across genres has been published in New England Review, Plowshares, The Rumpus, and the Best American Short Stories 2015, among others. Justin Bigos is a co-founder and co-editor of Waxwing, which just earned a shout out in the intro to Best American Poetry 2020. He, Aaron, their little one, and their kitties and puppy all reside in a cozy Vermont home whose porch ceiling is painted spooky azul.
Hi, I've just unmuted myself after I cried. Thank you, Sarah. That was just a beautiful prose poem introduction, and it's an honor to be your teacher and to know you and your work. The Jack Skellington thing is true, and why, unlike James, I don't miss the podium. That's really hard to crane your neck down as an 8-foot person or a poetry alien or whatever you are, right, in this world. Thank you all for being here. Special welcome to any and all witches in attendance. I thought I would read a ghost story. I'm actually gonna read some fiction tonight, and we've got a couple. I'm also a little bit under the weather, so if my voice is a little groggy, that's why. And why I'm in bed is because I'm a little groggy, but also because I'm gonna read a ghost story, and ghost stories should always be read in bed. you know, or in tents, or, you know, basements or whatever. I'm also going to try something different. I think this is maybe the second time I've done a Zoom reading, or I'm reading it right off the screen. So usually, you know, I'll have like the book, but my eyes are getting kind of bad. So if it looks like I'm staring right at you, I am. It's because I really like you, and it's okay. I'm going to start the story kind of from the middle. It's called Riverside Drive. And the premise of the story, I'm going to skip the first long section, is that the narrator's mother, throughout childhood, tells this ghost story. And I'm going to skip the first long thrust of this story where she tells it for the first time and just jump in. If you want to read this whole story, I'd be happy to send you a PDF or a Word doc, or you can get, it was in Indiana Review's Ghost issue a couple years ago. So all ghost stories and poems, which is really fun. So here we go. This is called Riverside Drive. But then the story begins to change. Early in high school, I had asked out Jacqueline Krause on a date. Jackie and her family were some kind of old school Christians, not Amish or Mennonite, but something more hard scrubbed than the Unitarian church my mother took me to on Easters. They dressed differently, their collared shirts checkered and always tucked in, their skirts never above the knee. They made their own apple butter. I knew this because before I was allowed to take Jackie on a date, chaperoned of course by my mother, I had to have dinner with her family in their home. The mother served a dinner of chicken and dumplings, homemade bread and churned white butter, and some kind of stewed sweet cabbage in its own little bowl rimmed with pale blue farmers threshing their crops. Afterwards in the den, surrounded by portraits of the dead, everything smelled like cedar, and Jackie could barely look at me. In the car outside the roller skating rink in Lordship, a tiny neighborhood in Stratford, right on Long Island Sound, my mother turns off the engine. I had been about to get out and walk around to Jackie's side, open the door for her, but my mother turns to us both, in the back seat, my hand a few inches from Jackie's on the hot vinyl, and she says, "I used to skate here." I had forgotten that she used to roller skate as an amateur, competitively, and in this moment, I remember her ghost story. She taps a Newport 100 out of its soft pack, lights it. She rolls down her window, and we get a whiff of the marshy air. "Lester," she says. Lester's mother was in the Warren Society. And instead of telling the whole story I'd already heard years before, instead of catching Jackie up, she enters the narrative with previously untold backstory. Lester's mother, Gloria, had been involved with the Warren Society since her late teens. She had believed in witchcraft and was determined to expel its practitioners from this earth. When she found herself pregnant with Lester, she was banished from her home. But Mr. Warren himself had taken her in. Lester was gay, my mother says, blowing menthol smoke through the window. He never told us, but we all knew. The night my mother, Lester, and Joe had seen the young man floating toward them, in his Buddy Holly glasses and high waters, telling them to stop, Lester had moaned with guilt. In the trunk was a Ouija board, Lester's. In some rebellion against his mother, maybe against himself, he had begun to dabble in the occult. There was nothing wrong with believing in warlocks and demons, of course. His mother had required this belief and had nurtured him with a small library of books on paranormal phenomena, wicked genealogies, arcane charts and graphs measuring the immeasurable. But these forces were to be reckoned with, not courted. Lester's transgressions were a secret from his mother. My mother was still unsure why he had put the Ouija board in the trunk of her Fiat, which is really no trunk at all, just a fold of space behind the back seats, not even enough room for their skates. But it had been there before they made their sudden decision to go get spooked on Riverside Drive. Lester had not secretly orchestrated the event. It was just a coincidence. But, says my mother, why do we say that? Just a coincidence. Like it's something less than what it is, an unlikely event, an alignment, for God's sake, of two things no one in their right minds would put together. She puts her cigarette out. No dumb accident, she says, any of it. I wait almost a full minute, not daring to look at Jackie, my first date, and now it seems inevitably my girlfriend. Then I let her out of the car. After my mother and father separate, I begin staying out late, sometimes not coming home at all. Jackie and I are still together, and one night after kissing for so long in a tent in her backyard, we both open our eyes and look at each other as if for the first time, then chug the whole gallon of lemonade her mother had made for us, straight from the jug. I light a cigarette, the one thing Jackie has said I will need to change in our relationship, and I tell her that my father had gone to that haunted house for answers. Jackie is going to be valedictorian, and she has already gotten into Yale, Princeton, and a few other schools, one as far away as Chicago. She is going to major in biochemistry, a field her parents say is acceptable, though flirting a bit with the unnatural. I know I'll have to work in order to convince her of what I'm about to say. My father went to the house, I say, with a Bible and nothing else. A Jehovah's Witness Bible, I say, not the King James or the Catholic one, or the one that you read. He had left his faith and been ostracized by his family for it, but now with the woman he loved having nightmares every night, sometimes waking up screaming beside him, even once begging him not to raise his hand, to stop asking her, to stop. He felt he had no other choice but to go to that old house, use any trick in the book to shut it up. He knocked for kicks. Jackie is in my arms, and I can't tell if she is asleep. Her immunity to illogic and superstition is solider than oak, and the thing I love most about her. And her green eyes, and her hair on my face. She tells me to go on. An old couple answered, I say, a man and a woman, white-haired and sweaters, smiling. They saw the Bible, my father in a blazer, an old habit returned, and assumed he was there to proselytize. No, said my father, I'm not here for that. But can you tell me who lives here? I thought this house was abandoned. Oh, gosh, no, said the wife. Benjamin and I live here. Would you like to come inside? My father hesitated. This was the place that had tormented his girlfriend, the woman he planned to marry for weeks. I don't say this part out loud. What would my father have done if he had gone to the house? I hesitate. He had no choice but to go inside, I say. After an early normal tea time, some chit-chat by the fire, my father asked if he could see the rest of the house. Most certainly, said Benjamin. They made their way up the stairs and into the 3 bedrooms on the 2nd floor, where the old couple's children had slept until they married and moved into their own homes. Then up to the 3rd floor, where Nancy, the wife, had her painting studio and Benjamin his office, and the 2 remaining rooms had been used as guest rooms and storage. Then Benjamin pulled a rope above his head, and a ladder dropped. He pulled on one rung, and the whole thing slid out, hit the floor. No one spoke. My father went first up the ladder. At the top, he felt something on his face, like a cobweb. He grabbed at it, and the room glowed in the white light of a brand new light bulb. Do you think this is scary, says Jackie. Not yet, I say, pulling her closer, invisible cicadas thrumming outside our tent. My father found nothing unusual in the attic, no lights at all except for the bare bulb on its string. The only thing green he found was an Afghan blanket. He picked it up, laid it gently back down over the typewriter it covered. The couple let him take his time, as if they understood he was looking for something. That's why he had come here. He was looking for something no one can ever find. Sad, says Jackie. Maybe, I say. I don't want to lose her, I say, but a few days later, listen to this part. My father went back. The whole scenario, after he'd had time to think about it, had seemed too unlikely, like something he had dreamed, or an elaborate prank. An elderly couple at the door, the knocker polished and possibly smooth, an out-of-season wreath on the door. Yes, that was it. My father remembered there had been an ivy wreath on the door, with little red berries on it, in May. Well, he had been raised to look with disdain upon Christmas. After he left his faith, Christmas for him became a kind of birthday. He loved it so much, I say, he would make a big cake with candles, buy himself gifts, wrap them up Christmas Eve, only to tear them open early Christmas morning. And so how could he have not noticed a Christmas wreath on the door of that old white house in May? When he went back, a couple answered the door, a younger couple, maybe in their early 30s. My father asked if Benjamin and Nancy were at home. Who? Asked the husband. And then my father saw it, above the couple's heads, a framed portrait. It was Benjamin and Nancy, smiling inside a wooden frame. Then my father said, pointing. The younger couple turned around. Oh, said the wife with a casual laugh, those were the owners when we bought the house. They were very kind, friends to us, almost like parents. They passed away last year. Now I know Jackie is sleeping. I have learned the rhythm of her chest as it moves with mine, how it slows, almost like a train coming into a station as she moves into dream. I tell myself that my father must have gone back to that house, must have tried in some way to solve that evil puzzle. After he walked away from the younger couple, as scared as ever, I imagine he went to a Catholic priest. If Catholics are reviled by Jehovah's Witnesses for their gaudy iconography, their worship of a female virgin, they should also be bestowed a begrudging gratitude. When no one else is willing, they are there to do God's dirty work. My father requested an exorcism of the house. The priest, Father Bill or Father Allen or Les, obliged. After working through the house, predictably abandoned, no younger couple, no older couple, no photos on the wall of anyone, the priest made his way to the attic. He doused it in holy water, a gallon of it, read some especially potent portions of scripture. Then he prayed and left. The next day, the house burned to the ground, and no fire department, including those of Milford, Stratford, Shelton, and from as far away as New Haven, could put it out. I'll read one more section here. If the house had burned, someone must have rebuilt it and moved in. Are you sure this is the house? Says Jackie. We're parked in the street, our headlights off, the engine still running. Yes, I say. Look, it's the only one set back from the rest, sort of on a hill. There are people inside, she says. I can see them through the curtains. It looks like they're eating dinner or playing cards. I know, I say. I press in the car's cigarette lighter, not yet ready to go. Jackie had picked me up at my house once the sun had set. I waited until I saw her headlights, through the mist, the gnats and marsh flies. Then I went outside before she could turn the car off. She's never been inside my house. Jackie starts the story again. Okay, she says, so after the young man in the Buddy Holly glasses floated down the hill, your mother backed up the car? No, I say, she backs up the car as he is floating down the hill. How many feet was it, she says. I don't know, I say, does it matter? She moves away out of danger. I see, says Jackie. Well, what would she do, I say. Seriously, put yourself in my mother's shoes. Jackie doesn't answer, and I feel her tense up, as if she's horrified at the thought or trying not to laugh. What, I say. Nothing, says Jackie. I mean, okay, I'm sorry. It's just that I would never smoke pot, first of all. And even if I did, I would not go to some makeout spot with my ex and some gay guy story prop. No offense. Are you saying my mother is? No, says Jackie. I'm not saying anything about your mother. I'm saying the whole thing stinks of cliche. Haven't you seen horror movies? Even I, the weirdo Christian who smells like butter, even I have seen horror movies. They're silly. My parents said it would be good to see how silly they are, then move on with my life. So this is a movie, I say? This, she says. No, not this, I say. I mean this right here. But all those years ago, when my mother and her friends were here, when my father went back, if he went back, a scary movie? I just wanted to finally see this place, she says. You talk about it all the time. No, I don't, I say. Are you almost done with your cigarette, she says. I bet we're starting to spook these people eating dinner, these normal people. And then I remember normal people. It's the phrase my mother used to describe an older couple she met at the door of the house. Now I remember. She had told me this story years before junior high. That was not the first time I heard it. We were in a car and I remember being under blankets, the car heater on. I was not even in kindergarten yet. She told me she had gone back. After the young man had glided down the hill, his hand up. After the car had driven through him twice, she and her friends barely getting out alive. We were in a car, the heater on, under blankets. I remember holding her right hand as she told me this story for the first time. Her hand bruised so many colors, blue, brown, yellow, purple, black. Normal people, she had said. They had invited her inside, but she declined. She didn't tell me why. I wonder if the invitation had scared her even more, or if the meeting of these white-haired people in their unchipped home with its fresh-cut lawn had been enough to convince her that what she had seen that horrible night was fake, a hallucination, that maybe the young man floating toward them had been the older couple's son, his hand up in a hello, wanting to ask if they were lost, why they were sitting there in their car, in the dark, in front of his parents' house. Palimpsest, says Jackie. What, I say? Just something I've been thinking about. Palimpsest. It's when you paint over your own painting, usually several times, until you have the painting you want, or until the real painting finally reveals itself to you. I didn't know you were taking a painting class, I say. I'm not, she says. Geez, I wish. She's looking up at the house. But in the fall, she says, I will. At Princeton, I'll have room for one elective. I mean, don't tell my parents, promise, but I'd rather major in painting. They think my paintings are just for fun, spiritual enrichment, as they say. I didn't know you paint, I say. She doesn't look at me. Palimpsest, she says. It's the only way I know how to do it, the only way I can finally see what it is I'm looking for. She runs a hand through her hair, and she's right. She does smell like butter, freshly churned butter. But sometimes, she says, sometimes you just want to take a putty knife and scrape the whole thing clean. I will stop there. Gracias, thank you so much.
Our last student introducer of the evening is Micah de la Cueva. Micah received the Writing and Publishing Program's Emerging Writing Scholarship, and she is a first-year student who will introduce Kelly McMahon.
Hello, I'm Micah. I'm introducing Kelly. Kelly McMahon received her MFA in Creative Writing at California College of Arts. She is the founder of Mayday Studio, a custom letterpress shop and bindery, where she has worked on projects, including but definitely not limited to Chickadee Chaps and Broads with Julia Shipley and Pride, VCFA's first chapbook. Her greatest achievement, in my eyes, is how to gracefully navigate being human. In her classes, she teaches her students to embrace failure, that there is joy in failure. In a competitive and individualistic American society, failure is shame, buried under the gravel of forgotten fish tanks. Kelly reminds us of a communal space, free from judgments where we can face our own failures and each other's. Coincidentally, Kelly is having a professional development talk about embracing failure next Thursday, October 8th from 6 to 8 p.m. EDT. Please prepare a pen, a notepad, and possibly tissues. As I am learning more about and experiencing Kelly's way of teaching, I am positively overwhelmed with her integration of real-life lessons and passion of typesettings and words. As she has said in her interview with Cameron Finch, words and stories were and continue to be my escape from daily life. From one introvert to another, it is my warmest to give you guys Kelly McMahon.
Micah, thank you so much. That was really lovely. I was talking with Justin and James over email. I haven't read in almost 20 years, so this is really nerve-wracking for me. You're getting some old stuff and some new stuff because life and also failure. Two themes, yes, which I do talk about probably as much as Justin talks about pedagogy, I'm sure. So I'm going to get started, but I'm going to give you warnings. Most of my poems are on the short side, so there's quite a few of them. And my investigations are a lot about sound and space. Okay, so I'm going to start. Peppers in the windows. Peppers in the windows, two windows, open. Green and red reflect silvery sink. Something baking, a small brush fire in the field down the road. Four lobes, an infinitude of possible space. Seeds hum like atoms. Your own lobes hum like open windows. Bronchioles and alveoli are wavy glass marbles of sound. Tender sacks reflecting green and red stoplights, green and red apples in early autumn bushels, cellar stacked. Cold days come rattling canned tomatoes and watermelon rind pickles. Doors thrown back, the last peppers. Seeds rest on narrow ribs, breathing. Waking through. Waking through sound or disjointed murmurs, a guitar upstairs, breathing the early morning fog, the hot coffee, the burnt toast communion, a linoleum table meeting. Find a word that is not meeting, and then I will have found your voice. The patient click, dog toe nails across the floor, the empty water bowl shuffled in the licking, an arm reaching over and over again to hit the snooze. Not yet. Not yet time, not enough meaning to jog your voice out of hiding places. Chambers still reverberate with the plinking and pulsating, a pitter-patter, a swirl like the sea trapped in a conch, then the settling of couch springs, returning to the hollow our bodies made the night before, this small pink house of sound. This is hard to do without a podium. I'm small, so I can hide mostly behind the podium, but it means my hands are free to gesture. Prayer. She paints doves on thick white paper and nails them to her fence. She brings hundreds of paper doves from her curtained house. Some are small as her palm, others larger. Their broad outlines leap off the paper in flight. They seem to soar beyond the 3-penny nails and leftover house paint, wings outstretched, so that the woman has to stand on tiptoes to trace the tips. Her slippers buckle under her weight and she drops back on her heels, exhausted from the effort. She stands at the fence for hours, arranging the birds. Finally, sinks the last 3-penny nail into the last square of paper, puts the hammer in her housecoat pocket, and steps back to address her emissaries. She apologizes for the ungainly burden of nails and semi-gloss, for the lack of supplies which caused the delay in starting, for her ignorance as to the exact number of feathers on each breast. She concludes with a brief wish for good tailwinds, and tracing the tips of their wings, she breathes life into her flock. The doves rush to escape their paper confinement. The woman is caught suddenly in a hurry of flight and thrown to the ground. She struggles to catch her breath, and from the sidewalk, she hears the great rush of them into the air, cooing in unison, the sounds. This is a new one. This is for my dear friend, Cora Brooks, who passed a few years ago. I was lucky to know her just in the last few years of her life. Thread. No candy floss, she. Hair a spider silk bridge between this world and next. Eyes see beyond the late summer sunset sky, over the deep dark lake, over the flooded town, over. She is linen, the flax rattled when raw, beaten soaked, spun coarse, then fine, every thread a reinvention. Valkyrie, soft-spoken, steel, shush, walking into the final battle. Meeting. Instead of writing, I paint my bedroom spring leaf, the color of a lime's insides. I drive through town searching gas stations for free air for my flat front tire. I drive to the grocery store 3 times, always forgetting to buy toilet paper. Palming apples and oranges as if they see the waiting in me. I drive through a certain intersection twice. The second time through, words slap me like the echoing slap of a gold Volvo and tan Oldsmobile. One now in the middle of the intersection, the other awkwardly balancing on a wooden fence. The fire engine nestles between them, its occupants spilled out like tentacles, feeling for injury, finding doors flung wide. The driver's seats have grown arms and legs and thoughts, all for this meeting. Greeting the slow burn of flares on pavement, ghosts of arms and legs and thought linger, attracted by the engine purr or pale gleam of paint and glass. So while I was in grad school, I had this great vision. And I realized what poetry is for me. And poetry is that bridge between my thought and my spoken word and you receiving that thought. So I called this In Between Place the Language Museum. These next couple of poems are about the Language Museum. The Docent. Flickering gray. Corners of real rooms, faded flowered wallpaper, sweat-stained armpits, old smoke. Through lavender teeth, a small tongue advances and retreats. No words come out, but the chair creaks, floor shudders in time to the rocking counterpoint. She tongues as if she might. What she offers. What she offers is suddenly the first incoherent color of song, the first 5-fingered shape of word. Grasp her parchment hand. 4 feet skirt the edges of rooms. We listen for the quietest. Once was beautiful, now sliding down, large and dark. Sounds like a grandmother knitting. This might be a drive in the country or many windows shuttered in greenery. 2 stories verge, vines knit and purl around the humming. Impenetrable letters, string paths. The Language Museum, open today. Part 2. Rows of impenetrable letters string a path, this yellow brick road, in a room without sound. We are the knots in the string, the hungry ones on the way. You reach into your pocket. Something bigger, seamless, the bright square of night. Pull out the thread of space. Sing and unfurl. This next one is a translation exercise that I did with one of my graduate school professors. She worked with translations and encouraged me to try them out. So this is from a French novel from the 80s called Dans l'ombre et au soleil de Lesbos by Roland Orivel. The poem is a pantoum. In a violent rain. In a violent rain, you could not speak. Drunk, the meat of splendor resonating in our clasped hands. It was 4:30. The concert played the death of Isolde. Drunk, the meat of splendor. Beside Tristram, her body lay in eternal grief. The concert played the death of Isolde. Her final words, in the joy, stiffened your body. Beside Tristram, her body lay in eternal grief, a fish in the impossibility of water. Her final words, in the joy, stiffened your body in one shunting line. A fish in the impossibility of water. Shadows take flight, one shunting line. An idea climbs the rope. Shadows take flight, resonate in our clasped hands. It was 4:30. An idea climbs the rope in a violent rain. You could not speak. People have been swept from the rocks and drowned. People have been swept from the rocks and drowned. And I don't know their names, and I can't see their faces except as they might have been. A little swollen with water and sea salt, luminously pale, like in the movies Under the Moon, the heroine always walks along these cliffs, and throws herself off them, and we see her face, a glowing moon under the surf. Hair dancing like kelp in the tides rushing back upon those traitorous rocks, themselves altars to the sea, sacrificing people to save their own sharp angles and positions, catching late afternoon sun and the brilliance of sunset upon sea. They tremble at the sound of laughter like tides echoing in dark tunnels. Today, it is not necessary to clean house, to pull brooms from underneath us and sweep the sands caught in cracks. Today, it is not necessary to sweep people like sand from the rocks. Today, there will be no drowning. This is another graduate school exercise, and I encourage everyone to try it out, which is a straight up imitation. This is E.E. Cummings, the Frisco ladies, or the Cambridge ladies who live in borrowed souls. The Frisco ladies who live in barroom clatter. The Frisco ladies who live in barroom clatter have clean shaven heads and pierced brows. Also with ex-girlfriend's blessings, new lovers, scented, spirited, drunk. They believe in Bud Light and Kathy Acker, both sour, and that the dominant politic is no longer democratic. Last weekend, they still found Dolores Park activists protesting what? The war? Probably. The Frisco ladies shrug tattooed shoulders and take longer drags on camel lights. They stare down the men walking on their corner of Lexington Street. Always in this changeable city, the sky foggy and unbound. The moon drinks the sea, a dipper full of water. This is after a book called How to Grow African Violets by Carolyn K. Rector. Here's a little quote from there. As she uncovered the answers to each new puzzle, she classified and assembled information in an orderly collection, and here it is. How to grow. 1, the number 1. As a newcomer, she had many appealing qualities: handsome foliage, glowing blossoms, flowering the year round with proper care. I made mistakes expected of a beginner, believing the subtle saintliness of eyes downcast. She didn't kiss on the first date. Cultivation under glass, or far enough away to see perfection. Squinting. Neither of us lied, just small leavings out. 2, leaf cuttings. She will tell you that all you need to do is set it in a glass of water. The kitchen windowsill is best. It may soon turn into a houseful. It's not a difficult thing to do. She didn't mention the do's and don'ts. I was disappointed too late. 3, selecting. If someone offers you a new or rare variety, you might accept it quickly, regardless. But if you are selecting a leaf to root, be more choosy. 4, rooting. She had been root-bound and happy. A small town, a small apartment, extreme weather in a life of folded plans. I was the larger pot, the forced expansion, the necessity of more water or sun. On the second date, I ordered a bottle of wine and drank half. She raised eyebrows, but drank the other half. We toasted to change and sunnier climates. We tripped down the spiral staircase into the snow. 5, first potting. I plucked the best of her leaves for the long drive. She didn't understand that it could be forever, or maybe she thought I would always come back. My first apartment didn't have a kitchen windowsill. Her leaves wilted in the waiting. 6, containers. She wanted to join me rather than wither another winter. I uprooted, found a home for the two of us, lots of windows and good light. She arrived late at night, midsummer. I could see her disappointment through the glass. City water is too harsh for delicate plants. We held together in the light. Under soil, I reached for her roots and touched air. Different rooms or distant. Live oak leaf pricked thumb, upset at the inconsequential sting, huffing and puffing and climbing upstairs. Want to cry? Drink the lemonade, eat the cake. An a cappella singer in your living room, beating time on knees, a rhythm like skipping or like horse hoof beats on dirt trail. You frown and think about summer camp, songs about xylem and live oak leaf prickers. When you have sex, you don't want any of that tender crap. You want her to rip the orgasm out of you. Sometimes it's being absent. Sometimes it's giving. She licks your neck and you want to tell her, keep your tongue. This feeling of skin rubbed too raw. Can't say, fuck me now, or I'm gonna cry. Red light. Sometimes the thumping heart is so loud, It's almost as if it only took 2 minutes of tears to get to the edge of the earth. Cold feet and everything, the breeze smelling of urine and chilled kneecaps. The man painting watercolor sunsets on a dime store notepad. That song, red light for you, green light for me, nearly filling the old house. Not mine, you say emphatically. You cry anyway and scratch the dog's ears. It's hard to tell up here if it's the cars or the waves making the whoosh. Cars drive too fast around the 20-mile bend. No lingering in 1899 for them. Crystalline rooftops, glinting paradise at the seals and rocks. We see them as we pick our way to the edge. The waves crash sand and fizzle. That old house is ready to slide off her girders when you give her the signal. I just know. Herbarium of memory. Notebooks open randomly, lapping against light of midday. We refuse to hear the puffs of joy in the thinness of our luggage. Like sleepers awakened from magic sheets, our shining points, a field of stones set free from every day. In the margin of a goddess, this day like night, some points so luminous, they emerge from these lines again. This title page in the empty sky. The endless when. When despair is neither the dark cloud nor the weight dragging deeper, but the endless unpunctuated corridor. When the body is the corruption, the cell without spark. When despair is filling the body with a burning gas, black clouds of rage, but not anger. Perhaps the air is too light or bright or hopeful in the way that makes hope balloon with the shame of its ebullience and cower in the endless corridor. When despair is both the hand and the absence of hand in mine, the child here and not here, and the smell of fresh washed hair 2 hours past bedtime in the dim light, kisses on flushed cheeks, small flutterings shushed. Mother's Day 2019, a true story. The surgical site is small, a minor incision hidden in the crease of her neck, where she still sometimes smells like my baby, held close, bouncing endlessly, humming a tune I've never heard. Perhaps it is the sound our blood made when we were one body. The hum I still hum, curled on the waiting room couch, watching the surgeon in my mind's eye, gently slicing open her small neck, catching the blood, the pus draining, oh, the blood, oh, the viscous life blood humming. There is nothing like this fear. Waiting for my baby, no longer a baby, not quite grown. Can she hear my hum? There is nothing like the siren call of a mother afraid for her child. One blood, one body, humming. Okay, last one. Winter, Vermont. 1. The dog in her first Vermont winter, bounding through thigh-high snowdrifts, equal parts joy and desperation on her face. The wonder of it and the suffocating terror of the unknown. 2. What is left when the mind clears? The snowdrift caught between two buildings, less a pile than a soft settling. The unintentional, inescapable eider down of thought, waiting for the thaw. Thank you.
Thank you, Kelly, Justin, and James, our readers tonight. We have time for question and answer for about the next 20 or 30 minutes. If people have questions, you're welcome to drop your questions into the chat, or you can unmute yourself and raise your hand, and we can call on you as well.
So I have a question. I'll start with Kelly, if that's okay. So Kelly, one question for you. That was a beautiful and delightful poetry reading and really moving. And one thing that I was struck with is that in a lot of your poetry, you're looking at kind of, everyday objects, whether you're looking at nature or you're looking at a mother-daughter relationship, and somehow, or the space between people, the language museum, between one's own experience and conveying that to someone else. And there's something so unexpected by the way that you create images. It's like slightly uncanny. It's almost like you're using something that might be everyday or a phrase that we might be familiar with, but it kind of jumps the tracks. And I was wondering, what is your process like when you're writing, poetry? How does that language or that kind of, those unusual metaphors, how do they come to you?
Thank you, Rita. That was very kind. I am a sound junkie. So sometimes just a little snippet of word will get caught and will sort of bounce around, the big empty space up here. And other words will catch on it. So I can't, I don't think I can narrow it down for you other than I love sound, and I'm also a voracious and fairly indiscriminate reader. So I read a lot of science fiction, and I read a lot of poetry, and I read a lot of biography, and I don't know, the words are there. I've been taking notes for most of the last 20 years, so I have lots of little phrases caught. Also, for those of you with kids, science sci-fi haikus. Nina, you'll have to tell me the title of that one. Children are really remarkable in their frank wonder at language, and they will really play and explore in a way that is really startling. So I have a lot of kid notes of really nonsense, but beautiful sounds and really unexpected things. Thank you.
I have a quick question, and I want to, since Kelly has just talked, I want to direct it to either James or Justin or both of them. When you're choosing to read from, whether it's a novel or a collection of work, you're choosing to read from it for reading, how do you decide on what portion to read, and what goes into that decision? Do you decide to choose something you think can stand alone, or is it just anyone that you feel in that moment you're choosing? I'm just curious to know.
Go ahead, Justin.
Sure. Yeah, it's a really good question. I think
Yes.
Can people hear me?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, just making sure. I think I hear my toddler in the hall going to bed now. I think it depends, on how you choose to give a little context or preface the work. I think sometimes even like tonight, I wasn't quite sure. I thought I could begin with I could read the first half of the story. But the first few pages for me are the least interesting part of the story. I stand behind, but frankly, it's a way in, like it's an entry. It's actually just sort of like the ghost story, like that the mother sort of tells for the first time, which is riddled with cliches. I hope the prose is good enough to keep people reading, but it's very purposeful, and you don't really get that until you keep reading it, that then she starts to change it. And I thought it'd be more interesting tonight, so I'm just using a specific example of what I did today, to enter into when the story already starts to move. And I think the first line is something like, but then the story begins to change, right? And that happens in a lot of fiction, stories, novellas, novels, is you have a sort of narrative that's being built, and then the author sort of starts to reroute you and surprise you. And I think those can be interesting entry points, right? Not just to sort of get to that point and then do that in the reading, but begin there. But you have to give sometimes a little bit of preface to it. But it's a really great question. I think for me, it always depends on on the work at hand. I've been working on a couple of different novels over the years, and it's really hard to read a whole novel chapter usually. It depends, read The Changeling, The Summer of Victor Laval. Those are like pretty short chapters. Of course, you could probably read a few of those, but it really depends on the work. But it's a really terrific question, and I hope that helps a little bit as far as just kind of like what went through my head tonight.
Yeah, I think for me, well, first of all, it was tricky because I've read about 60-something pages of this book, to this program. So I was sort of eliminating some of the sections that I'd probably choose to read, if I were just coming at it cold. And this to me was like just about the breaking point of how much introduction I can do about something. As someone who goes to a ton of so many readings, if the explanation of what's happening is too long, I just kind of tune out, and then I'm like, well, hopefully I can catch up, and you rarely can catch up. So this to me was kind of on the edge of that. And then I also think that when it's a work in progress for me, it just has to be something that I'm excited about. And I think that for me, this scene's like has a lot of life in it, like unexplored life. And so, I use the pressure of having to present it in front of people to my great benefit. Like I was still editing while I was reading. So, and I would say that this scene is probably like 10 to 12% different than when I started looking at it at like 1 p.m. to try and read from it. So, I love being able to put that pressure on something. So, but I don't like there to be too much explanation. And I remember very vividly going to a reading. I used to live down the street from a bookstore in Boston, and I went to readings all the time. And if the author flipped to 2/3 of the way through the book and was like, I don't need to explain anything to you about what's going on, I would be like, then why did you write 2/3 of that book? It doesn't make any sense. So, but I think, you're trying to give people a way in, you're trying to get them a sense of what you're trying to do. Tonally, I think that this section I read is like a really good example of the book, just in terms of the way things sort of develop and the way that people talk to each other. But to go back to something that Kelly was saying about children and their language, my daughter is doing this really wonderful thing right now where whenever we read a book to her, and we read to her a lot, but whenever we read a book to her, we tell her the author. And so all of her authors are named Jean for some reason, because she can't read, but she'll read to us by memorizing the books that we read to before. And so some of my favorites are Jean Clench is one that she said she was reading. I don't know, the books don't matter, but she was like, and this is this book by Jean Clench. And then Jean Story Vixen was the author of last night's book. So So yeah, I mean, like I enjoy the possibilities of language that kids come up with too. And I think reading out loud, both to kids and reading your own work out loud is so extraordinarily valuable. And I read with my mother, like my mom and I read aloud every night until I was like embarrassingly old. I was like 14 or 15 when we stopped reading together at night, like every night. And if my friends, and one of my friends actually did find out, and I was like, if you tell anyone, I will kill you. Anyway, yeah. But I think that using the power of like having to get in front of a group, the pressure that puts on your work, I think is extraordinarily helpful for me.
Kelly, I have a question for you. I'm wondering if there are ways in which your creative practice as a letterpress printer has informed or impacted the way that you think about poem writing. There are so many tests and iterations that it takes to get the perfect print, and lead type is so idiosyncratic. When I heard you reading, I felt like the sections were like page turns, almost like in the structure of a book. And I wondered about whether or not, having that visual practice then informs how you may lay out a poem spatially on a page, for instance, and would be really curious to hear if there are any lessons that you've gleaned from letterpress printing that feed into your practice as a poet.
Well, I thank you. This is one of the things that I love talking about it. And when I have students in the studio, they probably can't shut me up about this. But language is three-dimensional. It exists and certain words have more weight. And the actual physical act of putting individual letters together every word is important. So it's made me a much better editor, and I am a lot more serious about cutting out unnecessary words. One, I just don't want to set all that text. But two, knowing that each word has its own weight and its own physical form in space shows me where things go on the page. So the sound of the word will tell me if it wants to be enclosed or if it wants to live, or if words can be broken up. And I love the tangibility of letterpress, the texture of paper. Those of you who have, read a really luxurious novel that's printed on really beautiful paper, you can tell the difference between this and between a cheap paperback. It feels beautiful in your hand, and it just gives you a greater depth of appreciation for the language itself, because it is reverential. This is my church. These are the people who speak my language. And I thought I was a poet in graduate school. And then I found letterpress, and I thought letterpress was really my thing, because I'm really type A and I really like having things in order, and language can be so chaotic, but being able to lock things into their tiny lines and to print them on the page is really satisfying. And in the last year or so, I've really realized that being type A in the print shop has really allowed me a lot more freedom of thought and sound, and has brought a lot more language and play back into my life. So I don't know if that answered your question at all. But if I had to go back to grad school again, I'd go for sculpture, because I just want to make I want to make kinetic sculptures. I want things that move and that speak and that take up space.
Can I ask you a follow-up question to that, Kelly? So when you're thinking of like kind of the gaps that you need to fill and you're thinking of the sounds of words, is that something that you do just through experimentation, or is that something that or there are certain words that you're like, that you sort of lean on that are words that you know that you need? Do you know what I mean? Like, I guess the question is like how scientific is it, and how much of it is more like experimentation and feel.
I just took that water, sorry.
My daughter just spilled a glass of water on my feet.
It's really more experimentation and feel. In reading through all of this, I realized how often I repeat particular words. And side note, one of my grad school projects was an artist book, and to do so, I dissected all of the language in my thesis, in my manuscript, and sorted them all by type of word. So I had a book that was only adjectives, and a book that was nouns, and a book that was conjunctions, so I could see the repetition over and over again. Super, super nerdy. Also really, thanks Lenny, also really, really sort of obscurely satisfying to see the words come back over and over again, and then to see the words sort of grow and take other forms. So it's not just, they make their own sort of beautiful sound poems on their own. So it'd be like listens, listening. And I just love that flow of the way that word sound, list, but then also listing is sort of a this. So, so they all have their movement, and they, it's like those people who taste color. What it is for me is the words and the sounds, they make a movement and they make a space on the page. I wish I could taste sounds or colors or something. That sounds like really cool.
We have time for a few more questions, if anybody has anything that they'd like to ask.
So Justin, why ghost story tonight? Why not poetry?
Well, I think because it's October, we just had a full moon. We're gonna have a blue moon. My kid is really gothy, gothier even than I think I was. Like Halloween is all the time for Talia. Like we talk about Halloween throughout the year. It really is sort of like the Nightmare Before Christmas. I think it's sort of, in March we'll be like, so do you want to be Oscar the Grouch or do you want to be like a witch? But also part of it is just, I'm not writing a lot of poetry these days. I'm writing just some kind of working out some private kind of poetry type stuff. But, and I've been working harder on the fiction, I think, trying to get collection together. I just sent out a manuscript of short stories, so it's just been more active with it, trying to figure out like what a story is or what a story can be for me. I don't usually know. I'm kind of like writing a story line, almost like line by line, like a poem, and then kind of trying to look at the structure, almost like turning back and looking at it, and then kind of turning back around and keep going forward and messing around with it. But I still have the question of like what a story is, what a narrative is, and beyond short stories, just like what is our narrative as a culture, as cultures. It's just on my mind, that with the world right now, always really has been, but really this summer, let's do the 1619 project. Maybe I'm going beyond the scope of your question, but I'm thinking a lot about storytelling and narrative, and what it means individually and culturally, and what it means to. So that story I read tonight, is pretty like what people call autofiction these days. My mom and growing up, she had this ghost story she would tell all the time, and what's not in the story is that what really scared the shit out of me is how afraid she was of her own story. Because the story, no offense to my mom, was fairly banal. I mean, most ghost stories sort of are when you paraphrase them, there were familiar tropes, but to see how terrified she'd get and cry. And it was very unintentionally performative, or maybe a little intentionally performative. If you've met my mom, you probably haven't. But I'm interested in that. I'm interested in like how we can like tell other people's stories, or sort of make those stories of our families, our ancestry, our culture new and interesting. So long, pretentious answer to your question. It was a good question, though. Thank you.
I have a follow-up question for you, Justin, which is, could you describe a little bit about the structure of your ghost story? Because it's a story that kind of restarts and is retold, and every time you hear something new, it's kind of like the speaker hearing the story from his mother, and she starts introducing new elements that she's never said before, even though he's heard the story many, many times. And so we just heard part of your entire story, but how did you think about structuring it as you went along?
I guess that was the main kind of conceit that I sensed maybe from the beginning, is that the story, and I don't think that's true to life. I think my mother's story was fairly consistent. But I was interested in what would happen if you keep hearing the story and someone starts to change it, or the story seems to change in different moments of your lives as you grow older. So it's a sort of thing that you have, like you've inherited this story from your family or from your parent. So in terms of structure, I guess I was just curious how that could be chaptered, and chronologically, but then throwing light back on the past and what the relationship actually means. So the parts that I didn't read, the narrator like goes on. There's a scene where like the mom drops him off at UConn, University of Connecticut, and they have like a really spooky experience together that's aside from this ghost story that I just sort of made up. And then there's another scene where he's older, and he's with his like first serious girlfriend. He's living in New York City in like an apartment. And I kept trying to like add layers, I think, of what it meant to be haunted by something, with the mother's haunting as the one thing that kept coming back, I guess. And part of, the real honest answer is I feel, Noni, are you listening? I'm going to say, I like to say pedagogy. I don't know why. I know people say pedagogy, something about, I don't know, pedagogy. But, and now I just lost my train of thought. Oh yeah, what I was going to say, honest moment here, it's late. It's the one thing I really struggle to teach in fiction, I think, is structure. It's because I'm really like loose. I'm really drawn to monologue. I'm really drawn to, I would read 1,000 pages of Beckett and sort of like not care too much about what a structure is, because the voice is so magnetic to me. So I'm really interested in, in the lyric impulse. Not that that doesn't have structure, but the structure for me is sort of like, can I keep building, not necessarily building pressure, but keep kind of adding pressure points. Like can I keep myself reading my own work? Can I keep myself reading my own story and stay interested in it? And if I can, I hope somebody else would. And then I try to have, not necessarily resolution, but a kind of, I don't know, I think of like the ends of Shakespeare's sonnets, those couplets to me are less voltas than reverberating the question one more time, in a different way. I don't feel like those are actually turns. Sometimes maybe a little bit, but I try to do that in my stories. I think it's the last movement is to call the whole thing and just kind of shake the tree one more time. So that's important to me as far as structure. But that's a really hard question. So I hope I gave a little bit of, I don't know what, clarity on that. Thank you, Rita.
So one question, sorry to keep on jumping in, but one question that I have is, how do we read more of your work? Like, Justin, how could we get your story? Kelly, where can we find your poems? James, have you published an excerpt of this new book of yours, this novel, or?
I'll just say real quick that I put a link in the chat. James was trying to tell me, I can be really dumb about technology, I admit, but there's a way apparently we can like drop a file into the chat box. Like it just doesn't show for me. I've been trying really hard to figure that out. So what I did is I just gave a hyperlink where it's $10 if people want to buy the Indiana Review back issue for the story. Or again, I will just send it to you. I'll just send you a PDF. You can email me. So if anybody wants to read, I'm happy to just send it to you.
I have not published an excerpt. I don't, I don't know. I don't think that, I don't really write stuff that stands, to go back to Noni's question. I mean, like, I don't really write stuff that stands alone that well. I, like, my plots are all kind of a house of cards. And so I think the further along you go in the book, the harder it is to explain. And then also, the harder it is to excerpt. So it's tough for me. I have been writing some short fiction, and I think a little bit going to, speaking to sort of what Justin was saying a minute ago, like I'm reading almost exclusively poetry now, and have been for most of the pandemic. I don't know if part of that is having kids and my time is limited, but for me, reading a poem takes way longer than reading a short story. And I think there's just something about the challenge. There's something about how much it takes me out of my own head. There's something about the amount of attention it requires of me. And I don't know how many of you know this, but like I have a podcast where I interview readers, and I mean, as Zoe said in the intro, and we've been on hiatus for a long time. I had heart surgery in December or January. We had a baby in February, and I miss like writing and thinking about literature in that way, and I'm so thankful to be here and to be able to talk about it in that way. But in the interim, I think I've almost been exclusively reading poetry, and just kind of like reminding myself of just how much I love language, and just kind of like getting back to that base. And I don't know. I'm not really answering a question. I'm more just like speaking randomly about things that have happened to me lately. But I think that there's something about everything now. Like, I feel like everyone's comfort zone has just been obliterated. And so I think anything that you can find that gives you any kind of spark, you should hang on to. And for me lately, that has been poetry. And so I'm taking requests, I'm taking recommendations, I'm reading like everything that I can. I am not writing poetry. No. I don't, and this is partially why I was asking Kelly that question. Like, the physicality of poetry I find really fascinating, and I'm very, very jealous of it. And when I go to places like, like residencies like Yaddo or something, I very often spend a lot of time talking to the poets. But that kind of compactness is something that I've just never been able to. I can't do it. I wish I could. I mean, that's why I love it so much, because I'm just so in awe of the people who can. So yeah. Anyway.
I can't write fiction to save my life. I have a couple of very short pieces, and that's as far as it goes. But pulling things out, I can't. I love listening to you talk, and I read a lot of fiction and long form, but the pulling out of language, the stretching it out into stories and coming back to it doesn't, my brain doesn't work that way. It is really short and intense. So I haven't been published anywhere recently. 2020 was supposed to be the year of me, and I was supposed to come back. I had residencies lined up and everything. And now I homeschool 2 kids and fold laundry, because that's all I can accomplish during homeschooling. So I'm really good at folding laundry right now. And someday, maybe 2021 will be a better year for me to spend more time on the things that make me happy. Oh yeah, fitted sheets. I'm your girl. I can do it.
Lavita, that seems kind of like a good note to sort of wind down on. Our next Friday night reading is going to be on October 16th, 2 weeks from tonight. It will feature David Wyden, Francis Cannon, Tavia Gilbert, and alumnex Ugamaka Olasakwe, who will read most likely from her new novel, we hope. Rita, anything else before we sign off?
Yeah, so this was such a lovely conversation. I hope that everyone can, stay in touch. If you guys would like to do a happy hour before the reading next time on October 16th, we can do that. Meet at 5 o'clock, bring a drink or a snack, and we'll chat before the reading starts at 5:30. One thing I just wanted to ask Kelly before we sign off is, do you recommend any letterpress books or, typeset books to check out? Any ones that you've been reading or favorites that you have? And then we'll sign off in just a minute.
Any books that were letterpress printed?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
There's a lovely little press in Nova Scotia, Gaspereau Press. He makes beautiful, beautiful books. Not all of them are luxury full letterpress editions. Those are quite expensive. But I encourage you to check out Andrew's work at Gaspereau. He's a real wizard, really. Yeah.
Very cool. Thank you. So thank you so much, everyone. This was an incredible reading. It was moving. It was funny. It was frightening. I would love everyone to maybe just go off of mute for just a minute and give our readers and our graduate students who introduced them a round of applause. So thank you so much to Kelly, James, and Justin, and thank you to all the grad students. Okay. Good to see you all, and see you on October 16th for our next reading.
Thank you, everyone. I miss you all.
I miss you too. We have to real hug soon.
I know.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you.